Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Ticked Off, a series where we explore everything from chronic illness and healing to pet care, outdoor adventure, and wellness tips for living your best life. I'm Olivia Abrams, the founder of TiCK MiTT and your host for this series. Whether we're chatting with veterinarians, wellness experts, or passionate outdoor enthusiasts, our goal is to give you actionable insights and real stories that inspire and empower you. So let's dive in and meet today's guest. Dr. Geoff Dow is the CEO and president of 60 Degrees Pharmaceuticals, with over 20 years of experience in infectious disease research and drug development. A co-founder of 60P, Dr. Dow has played a pivotal role in advancing FDA-approved treatments for malaria and is now leading efforts to combat tick-borne illnesses. With a distinguished background that includes leadership at the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, he brings deep expertise in tropical diseases, regulatory strategy, and the complex process of developing effective therapies for emerging health threats. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. Dow.
Olivia, it's great to meet you.
It's great to meet you too. For those who don't know that much about you, can you tell everyone how you got into tick-borne disease and how you started 60 Degrees Pharmaceuticals?
I'm a research scientist by background. So I did my grad school in Australia before coming to Walter Reed to do a postdoc. And I spent 8 years in a government research setting, which was awesome learning experience, but felt that I could make more of a contribution in the private sector, and so moved into founding a company, 60 Degrees Pharma, that was focused on tropical diseases originally, and specifically malaria, because that was my main research interest. So we spent between 2015 and 2019, after we had secured the license to tafenoquine, which became known as Aracoda when it was FDA approved. So between 2015, after we got the license from the Army, and 2019, when the product was made commercially available for malaria prevention. So that's sort of how we transitioned to a commercial product. And then during the pandemic, of course, our product is indicated for malaria prevention.
Yeah.
During the pandemic, there was very little travel, but we started to get these reports from folks with what to us at the time seemed pretty odd chronic illnesses, and not very focused on malaria. And usually it was people asking for how could they access tafenoquine to treat what we later learned was chronic babesiosis.
Mm-hmm.
And around about the same time as we started getting those patients' reports, the first papers came out in the literature, and then there was a case series published by Yale last year about tafenoquine in folks with immunosuppression and relapsing babesiosis, where tafenoquine was being used in combination with the standard of care. So all the market signals were pointing towards the potential utility of our commercial product in tick-borne disease. And so we've sort of seen our role and contribution as putting together a series of clinical trials to generate data to validate that patient experience, and then support moving forward to try and get a specific label from the FDA for babesiosis for Aracoda. So that's how we came into the space.
Yeah.
Um,
You spent 4 years working on getting a malaria drug, commercially available.
yep,
And then you had all of these people coming to you telling you that this drug may be able to help people who are dealing with a tick-borne disease, not a mosquito-borne
that's right.
disease, Babesiosis, which is one of the most common ones we're seeing now in the United States. So that's absolutely
Yep.
incredible. Did you Do you see that there's a lot of similarities between malaria and babesiosis in the body, and that's what allows the drug to potentially help those with babesiosis?
Yeah, I mean, there are good parallels. So malaria causes illness by invading red blood cells.
Hmm.
They burst. Then you get the fever, anemia, and common symptoms. And Babesia works in the body the same way following a tick bite. It multiplies in red cells, the red cells burst. And so the acute symptoms are pretty analogous to malaria.
Hmm.
And tafenoquine targets, we think, based on the literature, malaria and Babesia with the same mechanism. So it
Hmm.
basically disrupts the oxidative balance inside cells.
Yeah.
And we think that's what kills both parasites.
Hmm.
And then the non-clinical literature suggests the doses you need are similar.
Hmm.
And so that was really the kind of the scientific foundation for hypothesizing that Aracoda may have some utility in Babesia patients. So that's what we're attempting to prove with our trials.
So many people who listen to our show either have Lyme disease or they just have a tick problem. So for those who are not as familiar with babesiosis, can you talk a little bit about it and how it may differ from other tick-borne diseases like Lyme?
This is preaching to the choir, but ticks are really nasty critters,
Yes.
and they're full of nasty organisms. Some of them are viruses,
Hmm.
some of them are bacteria, and some of them are parasites. So Lyme disease is a bacterium, and the most common tick-borne disease.
Yes.
Um, Babesiosis is caused by a parasite, which invades your red cells,
Hmm.
and in that sense, it's a little bit like malaria. And then the issue with, at least with Babesia and Lyme, and where there's a commonality and then where there's a difference, is that there's an acute phase, which in theory there are established treatments for. And then, but if it's misdiagnosed or not treated, then there's a dissemination and a prolongation of the infection, which causes, all the chronic issues that I'm sure folks listening to this podcast are very familiar with.
Yeah.
And, we need to be improving access to treatment in the early phase. And then there needs to be much more focus on trying to figure out what the best way to treat folks with chronic illness is.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so much that we need to do left in the chronic illness space for tick-borne disease and I'm sure malaria as well. As we speak, I actually have a bullseye rash that I got
Oh,
from a
no.
tick bite. So I am currently on a 10-day round of doxy.
Okay.
And I say to people, if you get a rash, you are incredibly lucky because not everyone gets one. I believe it's, probably only about a third, a fourth of people who are getting tick bites now actually get the rash. And thankfully, if you do get it, you can get, treated much faster and hopefully never enter that chronic phase. What does acute and chronic symptoms look like for those with babesiosis?
In acute disease, it's basically flu-like symptoms.
Hmm.
Um, so unless you've been recently bitten by a tick and you live in one of the high prevalence states, you might not know you've had it if it's a mild case of it. It can cause anemia and problems in some fraction of people who are infected and can lead to hospitalization. And usually the drugs, if you're diagnosed, work to clear the high parasite load at the start and resolve the acute clinical symptoms.
Hmm.
But it's what happens after that that's, I would say, undiscovered. And when I say undiscovered, it's not because people don't have it, it's because there's not a single um, systematic description in the literature
Hmm.
of what chronic disease is.
Yeah.
We know that the parasite can, and this is based on specific case reports, we know it can persist in the body for a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
We know from the blood bank surveys that some percentage of folks can still have the parasite a year after an initial diagnosis. And we know from the veterinary literature that related organisms are often lifelong infections at a very low level. The thing we haven't documented very well is what contribution those infections may make to chronic fatigue
Mm-hmm.
and other chronic illnesses more generally. And that's something that we're hoping to shed light on in the clinical trials that we're in the process of doing or will do very soon.
These clinical trials tell us so much. It's incredibly important that in a world like the tick-borne disease world that is incredibly underfunded and underappreciated, we have people who are willing to step up and participate in these trials because it's the only way that we're going to learn anything. And unfortunately, all of these diseases are growing incredibly rapidly. So the more we can learn sooner, the hopefully, earlier we can stop some of these diseases from continuing to, harm a huge portion of our country and of our world. It's as you said, that babesiosis is probably incredibly difficult to, suspect in an individual because they are presented with flu-like symptoms in the beginning. Do we have a way right now that we can diagnose people with babesiosis?
Only very early in infection.
Okay.
So if if you have anemia and a fever and flu-like symptoms, a blood smear may diagnose it, or a PCR, so a
Mhm.
molecular DNA test from a commercial lab, can usually pick it up in the early stages of infection. But once you get towards the point where you've recovered from your acute symptoms,
Mhm.
those PCRs go negative. And then the question is, at what point after you've clinically recovered from the acute illness, does your body actually clear the infection?
Right.
And in individuals who don't clear the infection, what does that mean in terms of, long-term effects? And I don't think we know the answer to that.
Mhm.
Individual patients might, when I say we, I mean um, physicians and scientists who are describing cases and reporting in the literature. It's from an official standpoint.
Yeah.
If you take 10 days of atovaquone and azithromycin, that's kind of the end of the journey from a mainstream medical perspective.
I find that just overall the medical community has such a variation in what they understand about tick-borne disease. Some doctors know a lot about it, some know very little. What is one thing that you see among physicians regarding tick-borne illness that you think is completely wrong, or something that you see that people say a lot that in your research you have found is untrue?
That's a very good question, and I'll try and answer it by still maintaining my friendships with people. So, it's challenging being a primary care physician. You have to pay malpractice insurance on the one side. To keep your medical license, you have to comply with guidelines. As a
Mhm.
generalist, you may not know a lot about one specific thing, even though you might be overall a really good practitioner.
Yeah.
So your time to go down the rabbit hole is very limited. Where prescribers are open and straightforward about that, it's fine because not everyone can help complex cases. Folks who are infectious disease specialists are very lasered in on objective symptoms, as a term that they use, and lab confirmation before making a treatment decision. And at least as it relates to like IV antibiotics or drugs with an adverse event profile,
Mhm.
as a non-physician, I can understand that perspective. I think where it starts to become a problem is where you're faced with the limits of the testing
Yes.
capability,
Yes.
and judgments have to be made about risk benefit. And then the caution that some physicians have can have real consequences for patients.
Hmm.
Um, and as one example, I had a very close family member who I was hiking with in Marin County
Plenty of ticks in Marin
in
County.
California, and you look at the CDC webpage, and there isn't much Lyme in California, and some people say
In
there's
Marin
none.
County, I know there is.
Yeah, well, I know there is because this close family member got Lyme,
Yeah.
got a rash, and I'm like, well, that looks pretty weird. You should see a doctor. She saw a doctor. There was zero hesitation.
Hmm.
Um,
Good.
Dermatologist said that's Lyme disease, and importantly said that the diagnostic tests in the early phase of the disease may be 50-50,
Hmm.
and they take a long time to get a result back.
Yeah.
By the time you get a result back, if you happen to actually have Lyme and the test confirmed it, it's already disseminated. And then
Hmm.
you're beginning to get the long-term problems. So she got the same treatment course you did, a couple of weeks of doxy, um, and she was great. But many physicians would do the test. This is my personal view as a non-physician. If I was a patient with a rash or and I was pretty confident I'd had exposure to a tick, I'd be getting a second opinion in a hurry because I think that's wrong
I agree.
to get back to your original question. That series of things that happened had luck at every point, right? Like she had a rash, she had a receptor physician, and the time between the tick bite and the treatment was less than 5 days.
Hmm.
Um, and there's an awful lot of folks who that isn't the story for, and then we see the chronic consequences of that. So probably a story your listeners have heard before, but um, when it happens to you personally or to someone you love, it changes your whole thinking about it.
Yeah. And what I find among the Lyme community and the tick-borne disease community in general is that they have had a lot of experiences where what you just described did not occur. And so to hear from other people that what happened to them was wrong is very validating. And that something else should have happened instead. Or just knowing that, if they ever got a tick bite again or ever saw a rash like that again, they wouldn't think twice about waiting to get a test. They would make sure that they were starting on a protocol very soon. So I think that that's incredibly validating things to hear from you, with someone with your research background, and knowing a lot of physicians and understanding that you don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but what you're saying is incredibly important and true.
I can see how for stronger like antibiotics where they're trying to do stewardship on to prevent resistance or where there are obvious side effects, maybe more caution is warranted. But with doxycycline, I mean, it's not a nice drug to take, but it's very effective. And, I have taken that product for years for acne when I was younger and never had any issues with it. So
Are there any innovations or breakthroughs that we're seeing in drug development right now that gives you a lot of hope or, allows us to see a very different future in that space?
there are a few interesting things happening. Obviously touting our own product, Aracoda for babesiosis, where that will be a market leading product in that for that specific disease
Hmm.
once we're through the clinical trial phase, which I hope will be end of next year. As a CEO, I wouldn't be doing the right thing if I didn't point that out. But there are a few other interesting products from other companies that are in development. Of course, Pfizer should be making announcements about a Lyme vaccine I don't know the exact timing, but maybe at some time next year. And I will be lining up to get that vaccine as soon as it's commercially available. There's a company called Tarsus who have a molecule that, in theory, you should be able to take it following a tick bite and it would kill the tick and so disrupt disease transmission. That's in like early phase 2, I think. Not sure on the timelines, but that's an interesting product and that's sort of an innovation out of the veterinary literature. And then the other company doing work on therapeutics is Flightpath, and they have a selective antibiotic that's probably early phase 2-ish. It's targeted mostly at acute disease. I think what's missing is if you're convinced that there's a resident organism that's still there, um, how do we prove that and then kill it?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you think it's mostly a immune dysmodulation associated with the original infection that lasts, then what's the immunological pathway that is responsible, and can immune modulators resolve symptoms? And so I think those are two areas in Lyme disease which there's some basic research being done, but no active therapeutic programs as far as I'm aware. The tick-borne viruses and the other tick-borne bacteria like Ehrlichiosis are mostly susceptible to doxycycline, and so there's been less research interest in therapeutics for those things.
Are you aware of any therapeutics for alpha-gal?
Well, no, but I think if you came up with something, it'd be pretty lucrative, and
Yeah.
I hope someone. It's not something we really would have the expertise to tackle because it sounds like it would be more of a biologic or a vaccine type product that would block a specific immune pathway, and
Mm-hmm.
that's not really our area of expertise, but it's obviously an unmet medical need that
Yeah.
most of Texas would love to see.
I think Virginia would probably argue the same.
Yeah,
Before we sign off, one question that we like to ask every guest is what is something that ticks you off? Big, small, rational, irrational? Let everyone know.
I wish everyone followed the scientific method.
Hmm.
I wish we all took our priors, proposed a hypothesis, and then went out and tested it. And I think on all sides, the whole vector-borne disease space would be better off with that focus. Patients and physicians, both traditional and alternative. And then the other thing is, malaria, the
Hmm.
treatment regimen is 3 days. And supposedly a neglected disease, but 100 years of scientific passion and dollars, even for that neglected disease, have taken us from gin and tonics to 3-day regimens.
Yeah.
And that's where we really need to be for tick-borne disease. And
Yes.
I don't know why it's so hard to focus minds on the problem.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I don't know either. And the amount of money and time that we put into malaria compared to tick-borne disease is astronomical. And while malaria can have a faster effect sometimes on our health, we don't see nearly as many cases of it in the United States as we do of every other tick-borne disease. And so we need a little bit of restructuring of what is our priority, at least in this country, for our own, people living here and their health needs.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Dow. Thank you everyone for tuning in. And don't forget to follow TiCK MiTT for more insights, stories, and tips. Until next time, take care and check yourself.